Hey guys, welcome back to the Hybrid Athlete channel. I am Dr. Paul Rimmer and I am here to guide you through my journey as a hybrid athlete and to basically start monologuing and see where it takes us in terms of education, in terms of experience, in terms of some of the things that I do personally and some of the things that I do with the athletes that I work with. Today is the 16th of March 2022, as you probably tell by the title of the vlog when I've eventually uploaded it. And I am now 4 days post the Cheshire GB Ultra, Cheshire 50. There's a lot of Cheshires and GB Ultras and 50s in there. Basically a 50 miler around the Cheshire countryside. Now, if you haven't seen my last video, I explained on that and I'll go through it very quickly. That was on quite tight time constraints. The reason for this is because I had to catch a train for an important event. It might seem a bit silly to sign up to a 50 miler knowing that you might not have even the time to finish it, even if you have the ability. However, this was a training run for the big event, which is the GB Ultra Cheshire 100 miler on the 28th of May. So this was a bit of a recce run really. The plan was get as far around as I could by a certain cut-off time and then see where I was. If I could have got to the finish, got home, got showered, thrown my stuff in the wash, got changed and then left, that would have been fine. I was lucky that the event was quite close to where my parents live. I live in the delightful Yorkshire, I was going to say Yorkshire countryside there. This delightful Yorkshire city of Leeds. My parents live near Chester, so it's literally 10 minutes away from the start-finish line. So it was a nice opportunity to do a course recce, be able to sleep in a reasonably comfortable bed without any of the perils of people snoring, which if you saw my video on my powerlifting competition the week before, you'll understand how it's nice to have a good night's sleep. Race prep up to the week was pretty terrible. I think I touched upon that in my last video. On the morning of the race, I actually got a decent night's sleep. Fueling felt okay, but I'm just going to give you guys a quick play-by-play of how the race went and some of the lessons that I kind of learned. So basically, I had because it was on a time schedule, I wanted to really push quite hard early in the race just to see how that fatigue would help me. Fatigue would affect me. Now, in my training runs, I quite often run at a higher pace earlier on and then will reduce pace over time, and I'm quite good with sustaining that. But basically, for this event, from the get-go, I just noticed that from the start, my hamstrings felt, a little bit tight, a little bit fatigued, and almost like, I wouldn't say it's quite a strain, but there's definitely still something there now, which is very unlikely. I'd come into this with a bit of a hip flexor problem, which I'd rehabbed. I don't know if it was starting off too fast. I don't know if it was the fatigue, and I would hazard a guess that the most likely impact was obviously having the powerlifting competition the week before. The fatigue that I had from that was there in my hamstrings, and they tightened up really quickly, but I think it has transitioned into a tiny bit of a strain. Luckily it's not terminal. I don't think it's going to affect me more than a few days. I'm now obviously like 4 days post run, and I am, I'm still recovering. I can definitely feel it in my body in terms of my mood state. My mood state's been a little bit low. Yesterday I was really drained. Like I had to cancel some client sessions and just literally couldn't move. I was just wanting to just lay there and stare at the ceiling and sleep. So, even though it wasn't a full event, I did push quite hard because I wanted to see what I could kind of push and sustain. So, sorry, my tripod keeps slipping downwards there as well, so I have to keep readjusting, so apologies for that. I'll start it higher and it'll just gradually drift lower, I'm sure. So, basically, I ended up getting to around about 55, 56 kilometers. Now, on the map where the checkpoints are and the distances, it didn't correlate exactly with what was coming through on my Garmin. So some of the distances might be a little bit off. I would always trust the course layout over Garmin GPS dropping in and out. And obviously on the race day itself, I had a GPS tag. So I'll go through this really quickly. So there were 7 checkpoints into the finish. I wanted to be at checkpoint 7 by just around about 3 p.m. Race started at 6 a.m. if I was going to be able to make it to the finish and still catch my train. So checkpoint 1 was about 5.7 kilometers, 3.6 miles. Predicted to get there in around about 35 to 40 minutes with pushing earlier on, about 6 minute per kilometer pace, about 10 minute mile pace. I actually got there in about 38 minutes. The reason that was a little bit slower was because 1, there was a bit of bunching at the start, and 2, because the race actually set off like a little bit later. So by the time I got through the start finish line, it was probably a couple of minutes to get through that because there was a little bit delay at the start. Checkpoint 2 was at that point there I just took on some water, lost my buff, early on. I always do that. I lose a buffer race. It's like something that I do. Like my headband type thing, which I usually just keep around my arm for just, dealing with snot rockets and things like that. Sorry for the grossness. God, what's going on with this tripod today? It keeps drifting. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. Let me adjust this. See if this helps. Okay, so checkpoint 2, I predicted getting through in about 1 hour 26. I got through in 1 hour 26:50, took on some water, topped up a couple of my carb powder bottles. And then between checkpoint 2 and checkpoint 3 was at 13 miles, so 20.9 kilometers, around about half marathon pace. I think there must have been an issue with the GPS or something on this not registering correctly, because I was still going at a fair tilt at that point. My hamstring had really started to tighten and my legs just felt really heavy and fatigued. By the time I got to checkpoint 3, there was the time that I left it would have been a little bit more delayed and later. So I don't know if that's what's happened with the GPS of when it's actually tagged me at the checkpoint. We kind of come off a canal towpath, went to like a local school. As I was getting into checkpoint 3, I felt fine, so I don't understand why this time is so off, but I predicted being there in about 2 hours 7 minutes, about 6 minute kilometer pace. It said on the GPS tracker that I got there in 2 hours 52 minutes. There's just no way that happened, because between checkpoint 3 and checkpoint 4, which was like a bit of a slog, quite muddy along the canal, it said that it took me an hour, and it definitely took me longer than that, because at that point my hamstring had started to get tighter, so I'd started to have to walk a little bit there as well, and I'd stopped to stretch a little bit. And also, I really, my guts. I'm usually pretty good with eating solid food, but I tried to do this mostly on powders and electrolyte and carbohydrate powder, and it just wasn't sitting in my stomach well. I don't know why. I wasn't taking on loads. I don't know if it was just the stress of the week before, whether it was the water cut the week before, and then foods the week after. I'm still trying to sort of piece together of what was happening there, because normally I'm pretty good at taking on food and fluids. My body just didn't want to handle it. It's happened to me before when I've done like really long runs, really high intense, like really long, quite stressful runs like other ultras. I've noticed that my gut can be a bit sensitive, as obviously your body goes under more and more stress. Blood gets pulled out of your gastrointestinal tract, out of your digestive system, and then obviously that can have an effect on your body's desire to want to eat food. You can feel quite sick and quite nauseous because of the stress. So I noticed that happening much earlier in the race, and the only thing I can think of was because I was pushing that pace earlier on a little bit faster than I should have done. Like I think my averages were, I was like I say, I was going for about 6 minute kilometer pace, but I was under that consistently. So I don't know if just pushing that little bit too hard did just kind of start to have a negative impact on my digestive system. So that's something to consider. But come the 100 miler, I'll definitely be doing that first section much slower. So yeah, it's not going to be such a concern. I think I'm going to limit the use of carbohydrate powders to just like a small amount in the water, like almost like a flavouring, even if it's just sort of 20-30 grams an hour, not sort of 50-60, which is what I push to here, and then concentrate on just slowing down and having periods across each hour where I actually take on some solid food. So anyway, got to checkpoint 3, it said it was 2 hours 52. There was something wrong with that. Checkpoint 4, I had to come off the course, and it said I got there in about 3 hours 30 minutes, and my predicted time was 3 hours 30. So I was bang on schedule for what I wanted there. But at that point, I was struggling more than I wanted to. I was struggling with my gut. I had to run to the toilet. There was a queue for the toilet as well. It was one of the areas where there was actually there was a toilet there. That was at checkpoint 3. So that might be why I came out the other side and it was 2 hours 52. So it must have tagged me on the way out. So yeah, by the time I got to checkpoint 3, even though that was 20 odd kilometers, I wasn't in a great place. So yeah, I got there on time, but it probably took me about an extra 15-20 minutes longer to get through, put water in my bottle, go to the bathrooms, a queue for the toilets, excuses, right? Then to checkpoint 4, actually, I'd factored in reducing my average speed down because that was quite a muddy section of the course, but it wasn't, and when I'd recce'd that previously, it was pretty horrific. It actually wasn't that bad on the day. So I think that even though it was, there was only, I think it was like 10 or 11 kilometers between those checkpoints, I actually still did pretty okay in terms of pace, but I was having to walk a little bit at that point. But I just really slowed down at that point and just took basically what I thought was an easy hour. But my timing was spot on. Checkpoint 5 was really where, in my head, that's where I had a bit of support crew help. I was predicted to get there in 5 hours 20 minutes. I got there in 5 hours 50. I think at that point, the differences between the checkpoint distances earlier on had kind of leveled out, because I do feel like I was about half an hour behind schedule at that point. At that point, I dealt with my blisters, changed my footwear, changed some socks, actually decided to pick up some solid food at that point. My plan for this race was to do it mostly on like gels and powders, but took on some solid food, started walking out of that checkpoint, and then started to feel really good. Like, it was like my body had woken up. My hamstring was still tight, but everything up until that point had been quite flat. Going out until the last little bit from checkpoint 4 to checkpoint 5, my body had started to feel a little bit better, and my hamstrings had started to feel a little bit better. Because for me personally, even though I'm a bigger guy for a runner, the fact is undulating terrain and even hilly terrain kind of suits me because I've got strong quads, and also because my hamstrings, obviously they fatigue a lot if I'm running fast, and obviously running on flat is mostly kind of hamstring dominant. Putting in the hills and things, especially with the amount of quad strength I've developed, especially with the amount of training I've been doing around my hip flexors and stuff to recover from the injury, and doing like hill intervals and things like that, has meant that I actually started to catch people and overtake people and start to feel good, and just giving a little bit of respite from my hamstrings was really helpful. Sorry, this tripod's doing my head in. A little bit of rest from my hamstrings. So at that point, I'd actually started to feel really good. Coming out of checkpoint 5, classic thing, had to like lance my blisters, which wasn't great, but seem to have this little issue with like blisters on my little toes for some reason. Need to deal with that. Probably just take them before the race, but easy fix. And then I started to get into my rhythm between checkpoint 5 and then checkpoint 6. As I left checkpoint 5, so my cousin was pit crewing me, so incredibly grateful for her for helping me out on that one. Took on some solid food, took it easy, struggled for the first part of it just to get myself back into a rhythm, but then started to pick up pace. As I got into checkpoint 6, my predicted time for that was around about 6 hours 50 minutes. I actually got there in 7 hours 39. Now, I think mentally at this point I made a bit of a miscalculation, call it tiredness or whatever. I kind of said to myself, like, at this point, I'm not going to get there till what would have been about 1:30 in the afternoon. And I wanted to be at checkpoint 7 before 3 o'clock to make the cutoff. And now the distance between checkpoint 6 and checkpoint 7 was about 11 or 12k-ish. So I knew I was only going to have about an hour and a half to make that 12k. And at the time, because I think at the time while I was going from checkpoint 5 to checkpoint 6, I kind of thought, well, I'm not going to make that cutoff. I messaged my cousin because I needed to get off the course. I didn't have transport with me, obviously, and I needed to catch transport. Get off the course to catch transport. So I kind of just made a decision to call it a bit earlier into checkpoints as I left checkpoint 5 and said, look, just meet me at checkpoint 6, which is at 35 miles, 56.3 kilometers, and I'll get off the course there. But by the time I'd arrived there, I felt good. But as I was coming over the last big climb of the day, I'd actually done most of the climbs. There was a guy in real bad difficulty there, like really struggling. And I've been in that situation, and because mentally I'd made a bit of a miscalculation in terms of when I get there, that I, in my head, I was like, oh, if I'm not by there, if I'm not at checkpoint 6 by, around about a time where I could make the checkpoint 7 at 14:50, 2:50 p.m. Sorry, guys. If I couldn't make that, then there was no point going on. When actually, if I'd have still got to checkpoint 6 when I did, even though I'd slowed down and done the last 10, 15 minutes, added about 10 or 15 minutes to my time. Sorry, guys, it's just a lot of information trying to get out of my head here very quickly. That last 10 or 15... I added about 10 or 15 minutes to my time helping this guy down because he was in difficulty. So I slowed down, I walked with him for a bit, slowed my descending down. And actually, my arrival time there was about 20 to 2. So in my head, I was like, oh, that's 20 to 2. It's going to take me longer than an hour and a half to get... It's going to take me longer than an hour and 10 minutes to get to checkpoint 7, which is where I'd originally kind of planned to get to as a minimum. So in my head, I was like, oh, well, I knew that wasn't going to happen at the start of it, so I'll take this section quite easy. Pushed hard for the first part from checkpoint 5 to checkpoint 6. Had mentally kind of realised that, oh, I wasn't going to make the cutoff. But what I'd done is, in my head, I worked out the wrong cutoff, because what I should have done is, even though I got to checkpoint 6 at around about 20 to 2, I could have easily still got to checkpoint 7. And I could have still got to checkpoint 7. And yes, it would have been after the cutoff, but I would have got that extra distance in my legs up to the 70k mark. And I'm absolutely confident that I would have got that. So as much as it can sound like a bit of an excuse, the frustrating thing is that even at that point, even having had a bad start today, hamstrings weren't feeling great, was definitely feeling fatigued and not had a good prep into that week, for a number of different reasons. I definitely feel like I could have got the 80k easy. Would I have been able to do a 100 miler that day? Absolutely not. But also, I did go out way too fast. So I'm a bit annoyed at myself for making that miscalculation, but it happens. But I'm also like, feeling weirdly positive about that because it's my first DNF, even though I was going to struggle to get around that. But I'm actually feeling relatively positive because I did learn, each of these experiences you learn something. So definitely realised that, I might be physically okay to run at a certain speed, but at the moment, for whatever reason, if my gut's feeling a bit sensitive, that taking food on is going to be a limiting factor for me. And it's going to be a limiting factor for most people in an ultra endurance run, because especially if you're a bigger person, this idea of being a hybrid athlete means that, I'm trying to carry a certain amount of muscle mass. I am trying to be strong, as strong as I can be. And with that comes a certain trade-off. I like the idea of, so I talk about these goals for me of being like, I'd like to be able to go to a powerlifting competition and, put up numbers that would qualify me for a British or meet British qualifying totals and, put me in contention with one or two lifts, particularly the bench press, because obviously, the fatigue that I carry from running is going to be there. So upper body, yes, you do carry central fatigue over, but if you're clever with your programming, I do think that you can get to somewhere near, not maybe elite level, but like a sub-elite level, with a with structured program. If you focus on one or two of the key lifts, I know there's a lot of guys out there that do that would still be in that elite category, but I do think that having that extra muscle is a disadvantage. But that still doesn't mean that we can't set some goals in performance that are reasonable. So for me, I always said my goals at the start of this year would be to be competitive in powerlifting, and I was, qualified for the British in my last powerlifting competition. It's become clear to me though that my goal this year is to tick off that 100 miles. I've got a vendetta against it. It's my nemesis from last year. So I want to make sure that that's the key priority. And the British Championships for the federation I compete in powerlifting are only 2 weeks before my 100 miler. I just don't want to take that risk. So I'm still going to train like I would do in my normal block. I'm happy with my training. I'm happy with the programming I've got now for the next few weeks. But I am going to not be doing anything too silly in the gym. Certainly won't be competing, but I'm not going with the intention of competing at this moment in time. Couple of reasons for that. One is because obviously the hamstring strain is still there, and I definitely think it's like a mild strain, but nothing major. I noticed that I had a little bit of patella tendon soreness from not from the run, but from the lifting the week before, and possibly pushing a bit harder than I intended to with some of the lifts. But again, we live and learn. I got caught up with the occasion on the day, didn't really stick to the plan. Went a little bit renegade on that one, but we live and learn. So this week's just been a recovery week. Do a couple of light sessions, a little bit of time in the pool, a little bit of time on the bike towards the end of the week, a little bit of strength work, obviously just being careful of my hamstring loading and my knee. And yeah, I'm feeling weirdly positive about the 100 miler, even though the first 20 to 30k of that, last week's event felt terrible. But I actually felt like I was getting stronger. I think in terms of my strength goals, I'm pretty in the ballpark of where I want to be and happy where I am. In terms of my endurance goals, what I've always kind of said is it's difficult to look at times and pacings and things with ultra running, especially on trails, especially with different terrains. It's difficult to really say, okay, I want to run this time. Particularly on courses where you don't really know that well. For me personally though, I've always said that a big achievement for me would be to be in the top 25% of runners. So if you look at an event and it's got say 250 people, and again, this is a bit misleading in the sense that, you could have it at a field with, like if you're looking at a 100-mile race and you've got 50 people enter, the chances are they're all going to be pretty decent runners to even consider and contemplate entering a 100-mile race. So, there is that element to it as well. But I've always said that in like more of these kind of ultra distances, which aren't to the extreme. Like for me, I'd like to be at the upper end of middle of the pack. That top 25% is where I'm aiming at. So I was having a quick looking at my places, and typically on this race, throughout every step of the way, every checkpoint, I was in and around between sort of 70th and 100th place. It's difficult to see on the GPS, and I couldn't get specific placings at each checkpoint. And obviously there's a lot of backwards and forwards. People stop at different times, they fuel at different times, they walk at different times, they navigate in different ways. Some people get lost. I had a little misdemeanor with getting lost, but it wasn't too bad. But I do genuinely feel like the pace I was going at, I would have guessed I would have finished somewhere in the region of between 50th and 80th place. I think there was 250 plus people. So that puts me bang about where I want to be. And particularly because I feel like I had a pretty bad day at the office. So lessons moving forwards, a few take-homes from this is one, is that yes, I'm going to use gels and a couple of gels and or powders in my bottles, but I'm not going to be as heavily reliant on them. Second thing is I'm going to really slow the pacing down on the flat stuff, because although in theory I should be able to run faster on flat, I tend to just do better in that kind of undulating terrain and slightly hillier terrain because of the kind of strength of my legs and things, especially because of the amount of work I've been doing since my experiences at my last 50k, which was very spiky, let's put it that way. So even running the downhill, the strength of my legs for running downhill means I can make up a lot of time there, as long as it's not too technical a descent, and the descents on this weren't too technical. So yeah, a bit more solid food, trying to stick to a bit more average paces. Like I said, I was averaging easily over 10k an hour for the first 2.5 hours or so. So I really want to slow that down, take that time every hour to stop, take the stress off the body, eat some food, digest, keep on top of it as well, even if it's just grazing. And that's something I preach to all my athletes. It's just, I guess sometimes because of the scientist in me, sometimes what I do is maybe I'll try and push things to a limit to find that limit, to know, right, okay, this is where the edge of the cliff is. And I talk about this a lot with a lot of my athletes. You know, we want to be able to see the edge of the cliff sometimes, but we don't want to, if we can see the edge of the cliff, we want to step away from that physiologically. So if we notice that our stomach's feeling a bit iffy, if we notice that, you know, we're starting to get a bit of tightness and fatigue and cramp, that's the time not to push through. It's the time to back away from the edge of that physiological cliff in whatever way it is. Slow down, get your composure, and understand that in an ultra marathon, you know, an ultra marathon or any kind of ultra extreme endurance event, there's plenty of time. You know, like there's plenty of time. And for me, I think that's where the longer distances, the 100 milers and things like that, because I am disciplined when it comes to the actual big show, the events that are important to me. Not like this wasn't important, but like I said, it was more of a race recce. When it comes to the big show, I know I'll be disciplined, because that's what I did last year when I was doing the Enduro 24, and the first 50 miles of that, I was disciplined. It went perfectly to plan, and there was some issues around that, which I've covered in the last series of videos I did. There's actually a full section talking about my experiences with the building up to a 24-hour endurance race where I was hoping to do 100 miles but had to tap out at 85. I'm not going to go into that here because I talk about that in great depth. So yeah, in summary, pretty happy with how it went. Really feeling a bit more confident now for the 100 miler. I've got a couple of little niggles that I just need to tidy up, which is always the case. Well, it's quite often the case being a bigger guy with these longer runs. The body's still adapting. This week is just a bit of a recovery week, so I'm might try and get out for a run towards the end of the weekend if the knee and the hamstrings feel fine, even if it's just a really gentle recovery run. Probably running at just doing an hour and a half at what would be race pace. And then what I'm going to do in my next video is I'm going to go through and talk about my next training block, how I'm structuring that, and how I'm trying to keep one eye on strength at the moment and strength improvement, because I can still definitely do that, but building towards that 100 miler, because it might not look exactly what you'd think, and it might not look typically like you would find for most endurance athletes. That's the trade-off we have to make with being there's the trade-off we have to be with being a hybrid athlete and being a bigger guy as a hybrid athlete. We have to make exceptions, but we can still make it work. And I do think even if you're watching this and you're more of a pure endurance athlete with just some interest in strength, I still think there's some good lessons to be learned here that I apply with my clients, and they tend to get better results. It's kind of almost like a less is more approach sometimes, you know, in terms of training volume. So I think in the next video, that's what I'm going to talk about. My next training block, I'll edit that into the video. We'll go through that. And then I will also talk about kind of why I'm doing things the way I'm doing it. It might not look normal, but it's definitely something that I think is useful for people who maybe they've done a lot of endurance work, they've built their volume over time. You know, there's been lots of hours on the bike, on the road, whatever it might be, running, whatever sport it is they do, and they've built a massive amount of volume, but they're not getting faster. Okay, so that's kind of how I work when I work with a client. I try and look at what their current training volume has been like, figuring out what is the limiting factor on their performance and their improvement. Okay, so I know what mine is. Mine at the moment is time on my feet. So I've got to get in a couple between now and the end of May. I need to get in a couple of very long runs. Obviously, very long runs are going to have a significant impact on fatigue. So it's not like you can do 60 kilometers this week, 80 kilometers next week, 100 kilometers the week after that as runs and build those up to 160 kilometers. So we have to be limited by the fact that, you know, realistically, I'll probably only get up to a distance of around about between 100 and 120 kilometers on this block, and then we just survive the last 40 to 60k, depending on how far we get on our training runs. But again, I'll talk about that next week. Anyway, guys, I always say these videos will start short and they never do, but I appreciate if you've made it to the end. If you haven't, well, you won't hear this, so it won't matter. Right, you wonderful humans, go and have a great rest of your day. Train hard, recover well, and I will speak to you all on Friday when I'll talk about my next training block and how I'm going to go about my approach to the 100 miler, which is in about 10 weeks' time. Peace.